Right there. Look at that right there.
Look at that head shake, man.
Oh, man. That's what we came up here for.
Okay, live in 3, 2, 1.
Right, here we are. Yeah, Jimmy, how's things rolling?
Moving along pretty good.
Nice. First thing I'm going to ask is, what do you like to fish for?
Just about anything that swims. What's biting, that's what I would go for.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I always hear you say that. Your favorite fish is what's ever biting. So why don't you just give us a quick background, James, on, your storied career in the fishing industry here?
My storied career, I guess I'd start that off at an early age. I was actually blessed to be the son of Ron Lindner, and obviously Ron and Al were really tremendous influence in the angling industry. Even from an early age, some of my earliest memories was actually fishing at my great-grandmother's cabin on Grindstone Lake in Wisconsin. And even at that point in time, we were using relatively, with today's standards, not much for electronics at all, if any.
Rock and rope?
That's about it. Yep. So it's sort of interesting. I mean, because it's so in the last 45 years, I mean, today's technology has really changed angling so dynamically, and you've seen this everything from the rock and the jug to the simplicity of an analog depth finder, the green box or the Super 60, you know what I mean, Humminbird Super 60, to side imaging, down imaging, forward-facing sonar, mapping. I mean, that has really changed the face of angling so dynamically. It's really incredible how fast it's changed.
Yeah, in your life, you've seen all of those changes, and it seems like that change keeps happening faster and faster and faster, and more so than something might take 5-10 years to see a technology move forward. Now it seems like every year we've got some new toys to play with.
Oh, no question about it. I think it's really beneficial for new anglers coming into the sport of fishing, whether you see it both on the professional walleye tournaments as well as the professional bass tournaments. Younger guys are doing exceptionally well, and a lot of people say, well, these flat brimmers, they can't catch any fish without their forward-facing sonar. I don't think that's the case. I think these guys work really hard. They spend a lot of time out in the field, eat, sleep, and breathe fishing. You know what I mean? And they utilize everything from mapping, 2D sonar, study incessantly about the lakes. You can gather so much information these days based on, go online and what lake, what time of the year. You can go gather that information, and that's why those guys are are doing so exceptionally well.
Yeah, for sure. And you've been a student of angling your entire life. I know that's just your passion. You love it. What's some advice we can start off with here to give to anglers that you think is one of those, maybe it's a process that you go through every time you're on the water that makes you a good angler?
I would look at, one thing that has never really, I don't think anglers have understood the importance of high-end mapping today. You know what I mean? When you look at what like Lake Master's mapping technology, and before you go out on the water to do some map study, to go find those fish seasonally, and every year, into understanding the nature of how those fish move in a system, that you can actually go and look at the map and identify very, very specific areas of the lake that would be seasonally appropriate. You and I actually get a chance to go fishing up in Canada on lakes we've never been before. The first thing that we'll do is actually drive around the lake before we, so many people go out fishing and they immediately want to start fishing. But you're better off to travel around the lake and then put down a bunch of coordinates on different areas based on what you're seeing. Are you seeing bait fish? Are you seeing game fish? What depth frame they're in? And so we'll sit there and look at for an hour and a half before you actually go start fishing, and I can guarantee you that will help you identify where the majority of the fish are at this point in time, and that's really key. And then from there, you can utilize your side imagery to really go in and break down an individual spot, and that's one thing that, to me, people don't use their electronics to their full potential, and that's sort of a tactical error for a lot of folks. They don't utilize it, what it can do for them before they even get to the lake. I can go do this in my parking lot at home, you know what I mean? Before I go to a Canadian lake, before I go to the Great Lakes, before I go to Mille Lacs, before I go to Lake Vermilion, to go there and look at what area, what species of fish, first off, that I'm fishing for. What is the most seasonally appropriate region of the lake? Am I fishing early season or in shallow water back bays? Am I fishing later in the season for walleyes? Say June and July, the bugs are catching, and a lot of the fish are going to be out on those main lake structures. So it can really sort of key you into a specific lake section before you even get there.
Yeah, for sure. And I think a lot of anglers would have to say that, you know, the mapping is one of the most revolutionary things ever to happen, in fishing. And to your point, that is so true. The more time you invest exploring on the front end of a fishing trip, it seems like that just pays dividends over and over and over as the week goes on. Just gathering information, checking stuff out, rather than just going out and starting to fish. Because, as you know, it seems like the hardest part of fishing usually is finding the fish.
Absolutely. There's not a question about that. And that's one thing that people, you look at how to go finding them, and, mapping is so key. All these sonar technology, whether you're talking just simple 2D sonar, side imaging, down imaging, forward-facing sonar is built on the back of mapping. You take the mapping away, and these other sonar technologies become a lot, you know what I mean? All of a sudden, 2D sonar would become a really big deal. Mm-hmm. A lot more than it is today, but it's, combination, high speed, moving around the lake. You still can't beat 2D sonar. You can talk about forwards-facing sonar, down imaging, side imaging. 2D sonar, I can go use it running down the lake at 45, 50 miles an hour and see hard bottom. I can see bait fish. I can see game fish, and even bottom compositional changes, rises ups and down in the lake. I mean, that's huge. You know what I mean? That overrides those other technology, particularly on the front end when you're initially hunting the fish.
Yeah, and so of course the location factor is the biggest thing, It seems like in fishing, finding where they are. But I want to shift gears away from technology and finding fish to a seminar I've heard you do a number of times. We've actually done some of these together, but that is magic baits. And I want to know what makes it a magic lure.
Your knowledge and understanding how to use an individual lure. You look at individual baits and they have a really narrow place of where they work. And that, why? You know what I mean? For that reason. Well, you take a frog. Well, a frog works in a relatively narrow area. Shallow water weeds. Could be around bulrushes. It could be around lily pads, shallow grass flats. But the thing is, this works better than any other bait, because the thing is, I can fish it through that cover. Then you look at other lures that actually hit, like a rattle bait, which has a lot wider spectrum of the depth vertically that you can fish the bait. I can fish this over, 2-foot rocks. I can be fishing in 2 foot of water, be holding the boat in 30 foot of water and fish it from the top of a rock pile for smallmouth bass down along the edge of it, down into deeper water where I'm popping it down. So I'm fishing the bait according to the relative speed on how I'm fishing the lure. But it's a great bait in the fact to go find fish. The biggest things for anglers, do you become a really, really tremendous angler? The biggest thing is understanding the depth, size, and speed of the bait you're fishing. People ask you, what's your favorite bait? I look at them, well, I have boxes and boxes of favorite baits, and it's all about where that bait is being used and for a very, very specific situation. That's the really key. You know what I mean? There's a lot of really fabulous lures out there.
Yeah, do you have any baits you've not caught any fish with?
Probably more than you, maybe. I don't know that. I actually have a lot of baits that, but the thing is at some point in time, those baits will come into play, and you'll catch fish with them. It's all of a sudden people say, I could talk about all these different baits that are laying on on my deck here. And the fact of the matter is my confidence is based on experience, and I've spent a tremendous amount of time with an individual lure, such as an X-Wrap. I've actually caught more fish, varied fish species, in such a wide range of fishing situation, I have a tremendous amount of confidence in this lure. You know, it's everything from saltwater, inshore, northern pike, walleyes, smallmouth bass, trout, white bass, stripers, you know what I mean? Central America, fishing for arowana, peacock bass. I mean, you know what I mean? That's all of a sudden you garner a tremendous amount of experience with an individual bait, where when you become really knowledgeable about an individual bait, you've fished it in a wide variety of different situations for various species, and then you really become proficient with it. You know what I mean? Where this is a fabulous crappie bait, you know what I mean, for early season crappies. It's a great bait for really fast early season when trout, you know, lake trout or not, lake brookies and rainbows are in shallow water, a high-speed presentation for them. For whitefish, I mean, a lure, you know, fish can't tell. You know, a lot of tackle manufacturers make individual baits for a given species of fish. Well, if it's moving at the right speed, it's the right size, at the right depth, it's a fish-catching bait. You know what I mean? That's what it is. But, you know, fish don't know the difference. That, oh, well, this is a pro-induced bait designed by Jacob Wheeler for largemouth bass. Well, do you know what? Boy, you look at that. As you know, this is a pretty darn good walleye bait. I mean, you look at this thing, and, you know, you can cast it, reel it down to 10, 12 foot of water, and it's a fabulous walleye lure. Mm-hmm. So you as an angler have to experiment with the baits to garner your own confidence with them. And your success will build on your confidence with an individual lure, to me.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And that bait that you're talking about, the X-Wrap, I mean, that falls into the category of baits that you'd call jerk baits. And of course, they're just amazing, versatile lures, you know, that work relatively shallow water. You know, I mean, I would say they're most effective in 15 feet or less, depending on if it's a shallow bill or a deep bill. But as you as you start to go through the season, other baits come into play as well. And to me, like hard baits, especially at the bookends of the year, really seem to shine, you know, in the cooler water periods. And I'm not at all saying that you can't go smash a bunch of fish midsummer on jerk baits, but at least that's when I tend to use them. What are some of the baits then you'll turn to as you begin to look at more of the soft plastics or lures that you might just have on the deck of your boat every time you hit the water?
You know, a 3.5 big bite.
The pro swimmer, yeah.
You know what I mean? This is one of those baits is exactly what I was talking about. This was a fabulous largemouth bass bait. It's a really good smallmouth bass bait. You have the ability to manipulate the relative speed of the bait based on the head is really key. It's one of those lures that I have tied on spring, summer, and fall is a swim bait. The interesting thing is about this swim bait, when you look at this bait, which is really sort of interesting because I know you, as in Al, and just everybody in our office has them from this big for crappies, this big for smallmouth bass, a 4-inch for largemouth bass, to a 6-inch for northern pike, to a 7 or 8-inch bait for muskies. The interesting thing, when you look at about almost all these presentations, is almost a duplicate. The presentation, what are you mimicking? Any predatory fish, absolute favorite prey, small minnows. And you're fishing them the exact same way. I'm fishing for crappies. I'm going to cast over weed beds and use it on a lightweight spinning rod and swim it over the edge of the weeds. Okay, I'm going to fish a 7 or 8-inch bait for northern pike in Canada somewhere. I'm down here, I'm on Lake Vermilion, and I'm fishing for muskies in midsummer, and I'm going to be throwing, you know, a 7 or 8, 10-inch bait for muskies. But it's the exact same presentation. So many different presentations actually crosses species and geographical areas, you know what I mean? And so you're just understanding the nature of swim baits today, and I mean, it's a fabulous lure. I mean, these are baits that you have to have them in your tackle box. I mean, in a wide variety, particularly if you're a multi-species fisherman.
Yeah, they're amazing. And, you know, what's cool about that, especially, you know, not necessarily the musky size, it might be a pre-molded bait, but when you're talking the crappie, walleye, bass sizes, you know, like the baits perform differently. If you're fishing with a 3/16 ounce head compared to a 1/2 ounce head or even a 1 ounce head. I mean, you can fish it so many different places in the water column. You can, of course, do the straight retrieve thing, but you've also got the option then if you want to fish it a little bit more vertically where you want some snap to the bait. So again, to your point, like it works, that bait works shallow, it works deep, it works in the spring, in the summer, works in the fall. I've even caught fish ice fishing with those baits too, right? So, I mean, it's like one of those things that I'm assuming you always have on the deck.
I'll give you some sort of interesting ideas. This last year I was over in Michigan and we're fishing for smallmouth bass. And we're seeing these fish spread out over these big flats, and we're actually throwing a relatively lightweight head through them, okay? The guy in the boat with me decided to put on a heavier head. And it was interesting on how just literally changing the speed of the bait and how many more fish we caught. With Ron Dome Jr., he decided to put a 5/16 ounce head. We're seeing all these fish. It was early in the morning. The fish were sort of inactive, but you're seeing them around. And we can see we're casting through these big schools of smallmouth bass, but not catching that many of them. The interesting thing, but when he changed the weight of the head and all of a sudden started pulling the bait faster, that we actually started triggering more fish into biting. By the same token, earlier in the season, we're up in Sturgeon Bay, Wisconsin, practicing for a tournament. And you know the way we're retrieving this bait? On the bottom. Do you know why? The fish are targeting gobies. So what I'm going to do is take a really lightweight head, slow it down, and actually reeling it, skipping over the bottom. I mean, just a slow, steady retrieve where the bait is intermittently interacting with the bottom. So what you're doing is trying to make the bait resemble whatever they're feeding on. When we were fishing over in Michigan, they were feeding on shad. In Sturgeon Bay, they're fishing on gobies. You know what I mean? So it's a different story. And how many different times have you seen it for walleyes? I've seen this exact same situation. By changing the speed where you want to slow it down can be beneficial for walleyes. I've been out on Mille Lacs Lake or even up on Lake Vermilion early season when those fish are up on the shallow flats in the developing weed beds. And sometimes you want that really fast and erratic, sort of popping it up off the bottom and letting it fall, popping it up off the bottom and letting it fall. And the relative weight, if I put a lighter weight, that slower drop speed sometimes can be really super critical. And on the other time, you say, well, what's the best way? Really fast or really slow? No, it's both. It's your willingness to experiment with the jig weight to figure out what the fish is willing to bite. I mean, that's the linchpin. It's you experimenting with an individual speed of the bait. Depth, size, and speed is huge aspect in angling.
And I think you brought up a really good point that, of course, I've been guilty of, and I think a lot of anglers are, is that when the fishing gets tough, it's slow down, more finesse, slow down. But what you're saying is that often that might not be the answer. Sometimes when fishing is tough, the answer might be to go faster.
Not even a question about that. I know that for a fact. One of the biggest things in angling that a lot of people do not understand is the virtue of speed of a presentation, particularly during the warmer water months. That is really huge aspect to trigger more fish into biting. A lot of people say, well, it's, you've had some type of adverse conditions or you're seeing a lot of fish. But the thing is, in these systems, they have a tremendous amount of food, especially like during the summer months in the warm water period. And this applies to walleyes. It applies to bass. It applies to muskies, where a higher speed presentation can really be an advantage to ultimately trigger the fish, where you get more reactionary strikes to them. You could be throwing a bucktail for muskies. This could be a crankbaits, a DD16 ripping it over the rocks for largemouth bass. It could be a high-speed presentation, erratic high-speed presentation in midsummer for smallmouth bass over some rock piles. You know what I mean? Where you get that super fast and erratic behavior is a huge thing that a lot of anglers do not understand how speed can be a really big thing in angling to trigger more fish into biting. There's no question about that.
Yeah, and as you're talking about speed and getting reaction bites, one of the baits that to me is just a home run is, of course, the jigging rap. And that is like the ultimate, worked in a certain fashion, can be the ultimate like erratic speed, like fish does not have time to decide what to do here. Make a decision, eat it or don't.
It's a ice fishing lure that was designed in the 1950s. Since that point in time, probably about 15 years ago, we started applying it to open water fishing, specifically for walleyes, and it became almost like a phenomenon. It was just absolutely amazing on how effective this bait is. I know the first time when he came off the water, Al came off the water, he says it is like commercial fishing walleyes. And you have to understand, he's out there during midsummer, and they're out on these big extensive sand flats anywhere between 15 and 25 foot of water, and the fish are spread out there, and he's taking and popping it up off the bottom and dropping the rod tip back, and just popping it up and it's dropping like this, dook, dook, dook. And he said it was just stunning on how effective it was to catch walleyes. And since that point in time, I don't even know how many of these that have been sold, and it's pretty stunning. I mean, how many different manufacturers had made duplicates of this exact same lure, because it is an amazing thing.
You know, just like the X-Rap, the number of fish species that you've caught on something like that, a pike, whitefish, lake trout,
crappies. I know, that's what I mean. When you look at this lure, it's a fabulous cold water smallmouth bass bait when the fish are spread out on deep flats during fall. It's a fabulous crappie bait, fishing suspended when the fish dump off into deeper basins throughout the fall.
There's a nice one.
This exact same bait throughout the summer months for lake trout and whitefish in deep water is an unbelievable tool. We'll drive around the deep water basins, swim the bait above them. So you see what I mean? Now, how am I fishing the bait? I'm not only bouncing it on the bottom, what I'm doing is swimming it through the water column, but it gets down really quickly. But you can position the lure extraordinarily quickly because of the weight of it. It's a solid lead lure. But I mean, it's a fabulous, effective lure for a wide variety of different fishing situations.
I would say that in our trips to Canada, which we do quite a few of, one of the biggest challenges we have up there is trying to find a better way to catch fish, especially in the summer, than the jigging rap. And I'm being honest, because we're always trying to make content that's interesting, different tools you can use in different environments. And it's like, well, most of the time, that's about the best thing going, you know.
And the interesting thing is the way we're fishing these fish is really pretty critical. And a lot of times maybe we don't focus on it as much as we probably should. What we do is identify like a small pot of fish, 3 or 4 fish, and we'll come through and catch 1 or 2. If you had a jig and a minnow or a Lindy rig or something, and you could probably sit there and catch a whole bunch of them. But the way we're doing it is you got to drive around, find a pot of fish, catch 2, and then move on. Then move to the next spot. Move to the next spot. So what we're doing, it's our style of fishing. But I mean, as far as a tool for efficiency to cover water, because it gets down there fast, you can fish it over, you trigger strikes, and move on.
You make a few casts, they don't bite, you're on to the next.
Next, exactly. Yeah.
Yep. Okay, so we've been talking about primarily, more search tools, baits that you're covering water with relatively quickly. Give me your go-to Finesse. I'm going to bring some people out fishing that might not be overly experienced, but I just want to catch. I'm not necessarily concerned about what I catch, but what would be like your top magic bait if you just want to chuck something out there?
It'd have to be a Ned rig, a Ned style bait, which is just a small, very relatively lightweight jig head and Ned rig jig, and then a small stick worm. And it's, since Ned Keddy brought that out, and since that point in time, it was initially brought out as like a finesse bait in the bass fishing industry and became a really big thing. I mean, in today's day and age, those almost any professional bass angler has a Ned or 2 rigged in their boat. But realistically, that same presentation is a fabulous for whether it be for smallmouth bass, it's a fabulous walleye bait. It's a fabulous crappie bait. It works for so many different fish species, and the biggest thing is because of just the the way you can fish the bait, you throw it out, and it's the only way you can fish it wrong is you're reeling it in too fast. I go out with my grandson, Carter, and we go over to a lake, and I said, Carter, you got to cast it out, but the biggest thing is you have to, to count to 10, then move it. Count to 10, and then move it, okay? And then just let it sit there, and you let it sit out on the bottom. It's got that buoyant tail, and it's just sit there moving along very, very slowly, and it just catches fish. Where do you fish it? 5-foot sand, 8-foot rock, shallow rock, deep rock, weed edges, deep, anywhere in between, and it is just a fish catching machine. It really is. And it's one of those things when Ned brought it out, and it's interesting because actually Ned used to summer up here, up on a lake of 10 Mile, up in the local area. And realistically, the guides in this area for years have been fishing a very, very similar presentation like that, which is called the jig worm. Mm-hmm. And it was the exact same thing. It was one of those presentations that small straight-tailed worm or, a little curl-tailed worm, and you put a lightweight head. Guides would use this for just catching fish. You throw it out and you're going to catch everything on it. It's just one of those lures that you have tied on spring, summer, and fall, and it catches fish all the time. And the biggest thing is it's so easy to fish because all of a sudden you don't have to set the hook. You start reeling it in. Oh, I got one. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that fine wire hook just finds purchase, and it fishes, relatively, for an exposed hook bait, like you can fish that and weed cover really well. And I think one of the keys to that bait is trying to fish as light as you can, meaning the jig weight being as light as you possibly can. Maybe one mistake you could make is fishing too heavy. If you're fishing around rocks or in weeds, you're going to get snagged up more, caught up more if you're fishing a bait that's too heavy. But as long as you can feel the bait, you're sure, be sure it's hitting the bottom. If it's windy, you might have to adjust your weight a little heavier. But yeah, man, that thing just catches tons and tons of fish.
I'll tell you a story about the Ned rig, and it was sort of interesting because I always have, my wife has people coming into town, and we're out with her cousin and her husband. And I'm fishing this weed edges, and we're just smoking this largemouth bass. And I'm catching a fish like on every cast. And Lori, her cousin, says, why are you catching all the fish and we're not catching anything? And I looked at her really simple and said, stop reeling the bait. and all of a sudden I hit spot lock on the front trolling motor, and Lori and Jory are up on there just drilling them because all of a sudden, just stop reeling the lure. Let the fish find the lure. You know what I mean? It's one of those things where depth, size, speed. Speed is a big thing. Sometimes we were talking about these fast and erratic triggering baits. Throw a Ned rig is one of those baits where it shows you the relative, how something dead sitting on the bottom, whether it be in the weeds or on a rock pile, can trigger fish into biting. That goes for smallmouth, it goes for walleyes, it goes for largemouth bass, it goes for all these different species of fish. Sometimes the fish are eating whatever they're eating. Maybe they're eating crayfish. I don't know what they're eating, but they want whatever their feeding mood. They want the bait to be sitting there still, and they'll pick it up off the bottom and swim away, and you'll get them.
Yeah, it's just such a great bait. In terms of these magic baits, one that we haven't talked about that has been dominating professional angling and just angling as a whole is the jig and minnow. Not a live minnow, but a jig and plastic minnow. And I want to say this was maybe 2003, 2004, something like that. That early 2000s anyway. You and your brother Bill were dominating the Rainy Lake tournament, moping. Like now it's called Demiki rigging, and there's other versions of it. But at the time, it was
swimming minnows. Yep.
Yeah. So give us some insight on like that discovery. I don't know how many people know that, but I mean that was really groundbreaking at the time.
At that point in time, we were fishing on Rainy Lake, and we were fishing these tournaments up there. And we were following the school of fishing. They were spawning in this back bay, and every day Willie and I would come out, and we're finding these fish moving farther and farther out. They're relatively shallow. These fish are 4 or 5 feet down up along these banks, and every day we came out and the fish were moving where they weren't there previous days. And then, I don't know, we were out about the third or fourth day of practice, and then it goes to these main lake points, and then it goes out like 15 foot of water, and then dumps off into the deeper basin, which goes out to these secondary sunken humps out in deeper water. And we're fishing around this bullnose point, and my brother Bill says, man, I'm not kidding you. There was a fish like 4 feet below the boat. And he drops his bait down, just a minnow, and just a straight minnow, soft plastic, and a jig head, and he drops the line right out of sight. And he catches like a 3.5 pound bass. And I was like, wow, that's sort of interesting. It's like, okay, I drop my line down and catch another one. I go, holy mackerel, what is this? We go proceed to catch like 3 or 4 more on the spot, and then we start identifying what's going on here. The fish were suspended really high in the water column. It goes up to like a 15-foot drop off to deeper water, like 30, 40 foot of water. And what these fish were feeding on are feeding on smelt in the system. And there's a tremendous population of smelt in this system. In the walleyes, the big smallmouths, the big fish are feeding on this pelagic forage, this bait fish out in open water. To make a long story short, we went to like the next 5 spots in a row, found the exact same situation where it drops to deeper water, and guess what? There's schools of fish sitting 4 to 5 feet down, suspended over these ledge drops. Their fish are waiting to go out and feed on these smelt. And it was like stunning. Actually, for the next 3 years, we led the tournament for, I think it was 8 days in a row. We led the tournament. The last year I fished, I think I fished with Michael Hayner because Willie was having a daughter, his first kid, and we were leading. I think we were leading for the first 2 days, and then we dumped it because of all of a sudden adverse weather conditions. We had really a late boat flight, and we got fogged in, and we couldn't catch them later in the day, and it was sort of a bummer. And I think we ended up taking 5th or something like that, or 3rd, or yeah. But the whole thing is it's the same thing we were talking about, that depth, size, and speed, in what the fish are used to feeding on, and they're feeding on smelt in this case. And you go take this bait, and we're not even jigging it. I mean, these guys would come up, what are you guys doing? We're just sitting there like this, and you're just holding the bait like a lonely minnow sitting out there suspended in the water column. You know, since that point in time, I mean, a lot of people, Jeff Gustafson won the Bassmaster Classic a couple of years ago. I know that Brian Thrift developed this Demiki rigging on some alternate reservoirs, but since that point in time, a lot of guys have, it's the big thing in angling today is using forward-facing sonar, fishing around these suspended fish, and casting and reeling these minnows through the water column, or resembling suspended bait fish, in dominating tournaments. I mean, a lot of different tournaments that are dominating, not only bass tournaments. And interesting, you go to Tom Wynn in Walleye World, and yeah, John Hoyer in Walleye World is the new dominant technique for walleye fishing.
Yeah,
as well as crappie. Excuse me, I'll go on the crappie fishing. The Mid-South reservoirs, the exact same thing. You know, how about the muskie fishing?
Yeah,
all the muskie guides are doing the exact same thing. You know what I mean?
It's super cool, and you guys figured that out long before. I mean, this was like, flasher technology at the time, to figure that out, which is pretty cool.
Well, it was sort of weird. This lake at that point in time, it had such a really tremendous population. When we'd be taking off in the morning and it was flat calm, it was like stunning, because you were driving out over the lake and you're seeing 4 and 3 to 5 pound smallmouths jumping out of the water out in over deep water. And the most interesting thing about that is, and it was sort of an amazing thing, because even early on, because those fish were so keyed in on eating minnow profile baits, if you were to go in there and throw a tube on the bottom and drag it on the bottom, guess what? They don't bite it, because they're not looking at the bottom. They're looking up like this. You know what I mean? They're all those whole fish. I mean, for a number of years early on, if you were not fishing a bait higher in the water column, whether it be an X-Rap, a high-speed jerkbait, a fluke profile, something swimming through the water column, you would not do that well. All of a sudden, the smelt died off in that lake. In a matter of 1 year, that smelt bite disappeared, and Jim Moyna wins the next number of events, and his partner, fishing in the back end of bays, throwing jigs on little rock piles in 5 to 6 foot of water, And it changed that instantaneously. The next years you're going up there, we couldn't even believe it. We're catching these great big pike and walleyes in the back ends of these bays in midsummer, warm water, 75-degree water. And Willie and I are looking, man, these fish aren't looking good because there's no food in the lake. They're back in the back trying to scrounge around looking for crawdads and little perch and whatever they can get. I mean, and it happened that fast. In a matter of 2 years' time, that whole smelt bite. And I guess it sort of came up and down, but the smelt population never really came back in the lake.
Yeah, it's pretty cool that connection to the bait fish deal out there, and like specifically the moping technique. I can remember, doing this early on with Gussie, and we were running around in Lake of the Woods years ago, and like the hardest thing was doing that for the first time was like a rod holder could often outfish somebody that was doing it for, because like you might get over the fish and you'd see him coming up, vertically, and it's like all of a sudden a fish would come out, and like you said, you would just drop the bait down until you couldn't see it anymore. You might be in 15 feet of water, 18 feet of water. You've got like 6 feet of line out, and all of a sudden you see these fish come up, and then all of a sudden they all come up, and then it's like they're fired up, and it's just like double.
Yeah.
But if you were working the bait, like you'd see one come up, like you're ice fishing, you start like shaking it or jigging it, they'd be like, yeah.
No, I know.
Don't move it. Don't move it.
It's sort of an interesting thing, and throughout that same point in time, you wouldn't even believe how many big walleyes.
Man.
Like, I know we're sitting there during one of the tournaments that we won. I catch a walleye. It's like about a 12-pounder. And it's like, I just want to get this thing off. And Willie's want me to hold it up for pictures. I'm trying to get this thing out of the boat. I was like, you know what I mean? Which is sort of unfortunate. That's how ignorant you are when you're tournament fishing. The thing he catches, like I've only caught about 5 or 8 of the fish this big in my lifetime. You know what I mean? All of a sudden, I just get out of the boat. But the whole thing was that exact same presentation where when you look at minnows and the way they're moving, they're not ripping around and they're not snapping up and down. And what you're trying to do is resemble a lonely minnow just sitting there moving along, and it doesn't need that much action into it to make it look very, very lifelike. You know what I mean? Oh,
for sure. I mean, when you shoot underwaters of it and just the movement of the boat and just whatever your hand is and how things are moving, it's enough. Like you said, it just looks like a minnow coasting around. And the less you do, the better it is.
I'll get to tell you one thing about this presentation, and I know Jeff knows this more so than anybody. Al Lindner is not a very good moper, and there's a reason for that. He's on his trolling motor constantly. A lot of times when we are vertical fishing these baits, what we were doing was we were more or less walleye fishing. And what I mean by that, we were slip drifting, holding the boat, drifting along the edge of a ledge drop, and you're getting the baits out and just holding on to the bait, whereas Al's always on the trolling motor and moving the bait, where you put the bait out, and what we'd do is you'd hover over this drop-off, and it'd go like this, and you're holding the bait above 5-8 feet above this ledge drop here, like this, and the fish are coming up off the bottom, exactly what you said, and you're just positioning the lure somewhere in the water column. And it was normally about halfway down. If we were in 20, you're putting it 10 foot down. If you're in 14, you'd have it 7 foot down. If you're in 25, you have 12 to 14 foot down. You see what I mean? So it was about halfway. The interesting thing is, even in that water quality, you soon appreciate how good they can see. And the one thing, when you think about it and you look at it, what is the most important aspect of using a jerkbait? The erratic behavior, but it's the pause when it's just sitting there. And what we're using to trigger the fish into biting is the pause, where the bait is just sitting there. Depth, size, speed. You see what I mean? It's one of those things, and it was sort of fun. It was really fun deal, because at that point in time, exactly as I said, we didn't have forward-facing sonar. This was straight 2D sonar at that point in time. At that point in time, I don't even think we didn't even have side imagery at that point.
No, definitely before that. And so the other thing that came out of that was whiteworming. Why don't you jump into a little whiteworming here?
Whiteworming is a little bit. I don't have a whiteworm here, but it's like a 7-inch or a 6-inch white culprit worm, and we take a 1/16 ounce head, and we'd take it and throw it out in back of the boat with braided line and a fluorocarbon leader, and we'd drift or drag the bait over the edges. Like once you get beyond this drop off, the fish are sometimes feeding on the suspended bait fish out here, and the fish are going intermittently on and off the structure. When they come into the structure and they're set up like on 15, 18, 20-foot ledge here, the fish aren't biting here. Do you know where they're at? They're feeding out here. So what we do is you take these baits, and there's another technique what they call the towing a fluke. And what you do is take the fluke or lightweight head or a whiteworm, throw it out in back of the boat, quite a distance out in back of the boat, and you just drip, slow troll like at 0.3 to 0.5 miles an hour way in back of the boat, and you wouldn't believe the size of the big smallmouth and pike and walleyes you'd catch doing that. And you're trying to use, we're using a 16th ounce bait with a 6-inch worm. It's like floating really high in the water column in back of the boat.
So would you do that when the fish were like boat shy or spooky, or was that just a more efficient way to cover that more open water?
I think it was more of an efficient way when the fish actually went off the edge of the structure and took off. But a lot of times, one thing, fish suspend two different ways. They can suspend like off a drop off like this. They can suspend vertically, or they can suspend horizontally. Okay, and if at 15, you know what I mean? A lot of times the fish will be suspended right out this way, but a lot of times the fish will be vertical like this. And the weird thing is the fish know where they're at in their environment, and they would hit this ledge drop. It's like a wall, and they know that. And they'll sit up and line up along that, above that drop off vertically, just like if it was a piece of like a weed edge or something. They know exactly where they're at in the water column. And that's both horizontally or vertically in the water column, how people understanding how fish suspend, you know what I mean? Which is sort of an interesting observation. I don't think a lot of people would really understand that, but after fishing them a lot, you'd soon realize that they know a lot more where they're at in their environment. You know what I mean? Where they're at and where they're feeding and how they access this food that they're feeding on.
Yeah, that's a really cool point. I mean, we've seen that. It's a really good point. Meaning that, you could be in 50 feet of water and there's in a mud basin where there's a hard spot in the middle of that mud basin. And there's fish 10 feet down over that 50-foot spot. You've got this huge area, but
That's
there's
how
this little hard, you know what I mean? It really is remarkable how.
Yeah, that's how Josh Bravosky says fishing for muskies suspended up on Lake Vermilion.
Sure.
And it was really interesting. He says, no, I keep on catching them right here. And then he started realizing what it is. It's hard bottom transitions that are 30 foot below where it goes from hard to soft bottom, and it's causing lines, whether it be the tulipies or the bottom of the phytoplankton, zooplankton that's moving up and down, and the tulipies following up and down, and the muskies are sitting, because he says, I'm catching the fish in the exact same spots year after year in the same basin. And he says, what is that? And it goes to show you, that's what I mean, how they know, fish know a lot about where they're at and where the primary places to feed are. And it's about the same thing. It's about, in that case, it's whitefish and tulipies and how they're moving up and down. And the muskies sit there in wolf packs and wait for the tulipies to come up to that level, and they feed on them when they move up, when the phytoplankton, zooplankton move up and down in the water column.
Those open water discoveries, what was once just this huge mystery, like what could be out there with like real basic tech, like cracking into that whole code. And now, of course, it's exposed with new technology. People can actually see what's happening, but putting it all together, I give you tons of credit for that, man. That is such a cool
A lot of people
thing.
I know, that's one thing when you look at in angling, says, well, don't you get ever tired of it? It's like, how can you get tired of it? It keeps on changing every year and bring out this new electronics and presentations or different understanding the nature of fish. You even look at what forward-facing sonar has done is taught us so much more things that we didn't realize and how the fish move vertically up and down in the water column, how fast they move. You know what I mean? A lot of times when you're looking on 2D sonar, I'm driving over the fish and it's like, well, it looks like they're just sitting there in the water column like this. No, they're very seldom sitting in one spot. They're constantly milling around, and they're sort of moving around all the time, and almost all these different fish do that. You know what I mean? It's just like stunning.
It's super cool.
It's just like amazing. Yeah, we were out on Mille Lacs Lake, and it was really weird in the fact that I'm out fishing the mud flats, and you're out fishing over in deep water. Normally, you catch them on a Lindy rig or a 1 ounce sinker and a 7-foot leader with a big leech on it, and you drag it around. And we're moving around out there with this forward-facing sonar, and all of a sudden we realize where the fish are. Fish are 5 foot down, suspended really high in the water column. And it was an interesting thing, and I called up a buddy of mine, Brad Hawthorne, who's a guide out there, and I said, Brad, you wouldn't believe where the fish are. He goes, yeah, they're not on the bottom. They're 5 foot down. I'm catching them on floats suspended. And he's doing the exact same thing. He says, no, I'm catching them 5 foot down over an area that nobody, without that technology, you would never in the world know those fish were there.
Right.
No way. You just would not know that. It was just like, that'd be a complete, you would never see that. You would never know that, you know.
Absolutely.
That's what I mean. It's a fun time to fish, you know, and it really is. I mean, that's what today's day and age, anglers don't fish so much where fish aren't. So it boils down to figuring out what the fish are biting on.
Yeah, that's been a big shift in it is, you know, how efficient we are at finding them now comparison to years back where, yeah, you could use some tech to find them, but a lot of it was, okay, we're seeing some signs of life here. This, you know, seems to make sense with the calendar. And then, yeah, having to throw some baits in there to see if they're really there or not. Now it's like you drive by and go, poop, poop. Oh, not here. Go to the next. So,
yeah.
A lot of these baits we've talked about, I'm kind of assuming, other than the frog, I mean, most of it's spinning rod setup style, or at least we tend to fish jerk baits on spinning rod style too. What would you say, like, for an angler that is just looking for like an all-around versatile stick? What's a good power and action? I want to get this collection of baits. What kind of rod and reel setup should I go with?
You know, an avid, 7-foot medium type fast action rod is something that would be, spooled with 10-pound braid, applies to so many different fish species. You know what I mean? A 200, 250 to 300 size reel. I mean, and that's money. I mean, that works for so many different fish species. You know, they can use it for lake trout, walleyes, smallmouth bass. That exact same rod, reel, and line combination is used for so many different fishing situations.
And you mentioned that Avid series, and that one, to me, this is a St. Croix rod, is great. It's that SC3 plus material. It's just a really well designed rod. It's got great material in it. It's light, it's sensitive, made right in Park Falls, Wisconsin, which is super cool. And that one comes with a 15-year warranty on it too. So when you start to look at, these different options within the spectrum of rods, you can spend as little or as much as you want really with rods. But that Avid series really comes in where you're getting a lot of those features and benefits of a high-end rod, but it is certainly a big step up from the Kmart version that you're gonna get for
not even
really
a question
nice
about that. Yeah, and then in the rod is, you know what I mean? It's so, when we started fishing with St. Croix rods, it was really sort of interesting because the rods are so well designed for given fishing situations, and you really know it. I mean, you really do, whether it be the glass series, or you know what I mean, or different individual, the way the rod is designed, not only for casting an individual bait, for fishing, actually imparting the action into the bait, but once a fish comes up and hits the bait, you load up and set the hook, and it's like all of a sudden you're pounding a nail. With the right, you set the hook and it goes stunk, and you go, whoa, you got him. And then not only that, it's landing the fish. You know what I mean? And they've actually put a lot of R&D into that rod for so many different situations. It's amazing. It really is. But then maybe that's why they have, I don't even know how many different rods they have. It's a pretty stunning, for various fishing situations.
Right,
yeah.
And you can get as specific as you want within all their lines. Of course, that's just a good all-around versatile stick. And you mentioned also braid too, and I think that's a big deal, something that lasts a long time. But to me, like you said, that 2,500 size reel, whatever, pick your poison, a Regal or a Revros or a Fuego, matches well with that. But the 10-pound braid is something that you spool it up, You don't have to change the line all the time. It's not like mono or fluorocarbon. You're gonna have memory. It's gonna go bad. You stretch it out a few times. It's gonna be funky. You can, if you're not fishing a lot, you can fish many seasons on that, and then just learning a good connection knot to have a fluorocarbon leader, and you are in business for a long time and can do so many different things.
It's one thing, fishing braided line or any type of even monofilament line is, line maintenance and utilization of like various type of silicone line treatment, and you'll really minimize your problems with a spinning rod, no question about that. Even a bait casting rod, I use it a lot. If I'm fishing tournaments, I'm spraying it on there all the time. Some type of line silicone to actually, and every once in a while, if I'm fishing like a tube or some bait that's spinning, I'll literally cut it off and run it out in back of the boat to straighten it out. You know what I mean?
That's a great trick.
And it's just like amazing, and you will minimize where all of a sudden you're not all of a sudden seeing the line coming off in 6 different spots simultaneously. I just don't have that problem anymore.
That's really cool. When we're talking about line, this is a great question that gets asked all the time. So, like, what's the best line to use?
Wow, that's you know what? The interesting thing, one thing I will say about line is I've actually started using far and away more bright line, brilliantly colored line than ever before. And a lot of people that wouldn't make sense, especially because we live up in the North Country and we have really super clear water lakes. But a lot of our jigging presentations where you're slackline fishing the baits or you're popping them and you're not in contact, you're looking to detect strikes with seeing the line jump. And I'm not tracking the lure. I just all of a sudden see it snap, whether it be throwing a jerk bait, it could be throwing a Ned rig, it could be pop jigging for walleyes and weed edges, where that really brilliantly colored line is really pretty key to me. I think more so, that's one thing that's really a big thing, and you see it in both on the walleye side and the bass fishermen. A lot of guys are using a lot more of these bright colored braids with a fluorocarbon leader at some length of that, whatever that is, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm almost exclusively fishing braided line. The exceptions I can think of is sometimes that shallow water snap jigging or jig and minnow presentation, kind of like mono here and there, like fishing with mono for some topwater situations, a little bit of bass stuff with fluorocarbon. But on the spinning rod side of things, like if you went through, I've seen your collection too, but if you look through our collection of spinning rods, it's going to be white, neon, green, yellow, like all these colors that just provide that great contrast. Because like you said, you can see the bites, and it is so important, especially on those slackline presentations. The Ned rig, like you talked about, where you might have a little bow in the line, jerk bait where you're throwing slack to the bait. You just see that line jump, and you're not as sensitive as you might think a rod is. When there's slack in the line, you're not feeling for the fish. You're looking, you're visually watching for that strike.
The other thing one thing when you talk about braided line versus like a monofilament, you also have so much stretch in the line where you have 15-20% stretch, and you're casting a long distance out away from the boat. That direct contact for strike detection, then not only that, is hooking is huge. I mean, where you don't have that, there's no stretch in braid, obviously, and it's just like you immediately, even, in the North Country, we actually have a lot of zebra mussels. The water clarity is incredible clear. Braided line, and I take some of these baits, I can throw these baits and launch them a long distance away from the boat. A lot of times I'm catching walleyes in many of these lakes, the longer cast or smallmouth bass, the farther I can get away from the boat, the more fish I'm going to catch. Not even a question about that.
Yeah, absolutely. There's just so many layers of where braid has absolute certain benefits. So do yourself a favor, learn to tie a good connection knot. What's your favorite connecting knot?
I'm an FG guy. FG knot, absolutely.
Do you need the cheaters for that one or not so much?
It takes me a while to do that, depending on the wind factor. There's a couple of other knots. You can do the one knot where it's just 4 overhands, but it does not have anything. When you actually understand how to tie an FG knot, the strength of it is really pretty incredible. It really is, and I've used it for so many different fish species, everything from 150-pound tuna, where you understand what a knot is and
Sure.
an FG connection from, when you're using 80-pound braid and, 80 to 100-pound fluorocarbon leader. But even when you're talking 8-pound or 6-pound to an 8 or 10-pound braid and how strong it is, and it rarely breaks at the FG knot.
Yeah.
It doesn't. It just does not break there.
Sure. Yeah, you bet. So kind of as we're on this equipment talk, I notice that a lot of times we tend to get caught up because we're so into fishing, get caught up in like these like hyper vertical topics where we're super into FG knot, for example, or, all these real specific things. But, we've had these experiences where we get done talking about the finer points of some presentation, and then somebody will ask, well, what's the best rod and reel to use? Should you be using a baitcaster or a spinning rod? And so I think a lot of times we just get too far down the line of these specific things. But like I think that's a great question that a lot of anglers might ask is like, why would you choose a baitcaster versus a spinning rod? A great example for us up here would be we love using spinning rods for fishing jerk baits. Whereas, if you went down south, those bass boys would think that we're absolutely nuts for using that. So kind of what's your take, and where do you kind of draw the line for those that are looking to find reasons to fish one or the other?
Well, one thing I can tell you, today's bait casting reels are pretty amazing. They really are, with these, like the SV.
Yeah, the SV technology, yeah.
It's just unbelievable. If you have this thing tuned right, you can't backlash it. You know what I mean? That's an amazing thing, which has always been a concern for a lot of different people because they're casting into the wind. You're throwing a larger profile bait. I'm throwing crankbaits. I'm throwing jerkbaits, something that's wind resistant. And it's pretty amazing that you can cast a spinning or a bait casting rod with very, very little problems with backlashing per se.
Yeah, and so for me, I'm using it a lot of times when I'm pulling baits, you know what I mean? Spinner bait, chatter bait, crank bait. I just feel that a bait caster personally is a better tool for pulling,
Repetitive casting. Not only that, one thing that I would say about a bait casting versus spinning reel, when I'm fishing around cover and I'm making accurate casts, a bait casting rod and your ability to thumb the spool, and once you get used to it, is position a lure, whatever.
Way more accurate.
Whether I'm fishing docks, whether I'm fishing around wood, I'm fishing around some type of emergent cover that I'm fishing the edges of something. The bait casting reel is bar none a better tool to accurately position an individual lure. Whereas spinning rods, where we're fishing a lot of deeper water situations where you're not accurately casting to a very, very specific spot, where a spinning rod is a lot more of a beneficial tool. Not only that, I'm using lighter line fishing situations where, to me, I use spinning a lot more in that moderate to deeper water fishing situation. The interesting thing is when you watch the professional bass angling, and that's a really driving force in angling today, whether we want it or not, or is a good thing or a bad thing. But the interesting thing is every tournament, even if they're on Toledo Bend, Lake Fork, these big wooded reservoirs, it's an interesting thing is almost every bass tournament in the top 10, some of those guys in that tournament will be fishing with spinning rods. Mm-hmm. And there's a reason for that on the finesse side of things and how they're presenting baits, and a lot of it's associated with this new forward-facing sonar thing, where they're finesse fishing, they're identifying the fish, they're moving very, very slowly around the fish, and they're positioning this bait, and I'm going to catch that one, where they're using a spinning rod to more or less finesse fish to catch that bait, some type of slow-dropping Ned rig or a Nico bait or some type of drop-shotting presentation to trigger a fish into biting.
Yeah, for sure. And it wasn't long ago that the bass world was not using spinning gear, but today it seems like you're way more in tune with it than I am, that spinning absolutely dominates. I'm going to switch back here just a little bit. We talked earlier about, finding fish being the real secret to catching fish, and we were talking more specifically at that point in time about once you're on a body of water, how to find the fish on that lake. But you love traveling. You're a well-traveled angler. Like, how are you? Let's just say we're in Minnesota here. Like, how are you choosing to plan your attack on exploring new lakes, which you love to do so often?
Yeah, we actually were blessed to live in the land of Minnesota, the land of 10,000 lakes, and Jeremy, Al, and a bunch of the boys here have fished a lot of them. And there's so many of them that a lot of times I will go out for like a weekend or a day, and I will go fish 3 lakes I've never been to before. And been using this like the Onyx Fish app, which is a really cool tool for anglers to not only to look at what's in the lake, because it has a lot of this different information, data from the Department of Natural Resources, the fish species, size structure of the fish. Not only that, all the landings. So what I'm using it for is it's sort of a navigational tool. I can punch it in. Here's the landing. It comes up on CarPlay. I know where I'm putting my boat in the next spot, and I've never been there before. You understand? We use this a lot actually for ice fishing as well. It's a cool tool, and it has a lot of different features on there, from everything from wind, weather conditions, trophy potential, all these different features that you can potentially use to not only find the lake you're fishing on, but what species am I fishing for? Am I fishing for really big bluegills? Does it have big largemouth bass? I found a couple of them some really fabulous big whopper bass lakes this last year using it. But yeah.
Yeah, no, it is amazing. I don't think Rand McNally cares for it too much, but it's a lot nicer to remember the old gazetteers, and you're trying to navigate that backcountry. And now, like you
we
said,
had all the county maps. I'd have big stacks of these county maps when you're using it. Now it's instantaneously. You break open the Onyx Fish, find the area you're in, hit the button, and it goes right on CarPlay. I can scroll through it, look at any of the details that I need to go find whatever fish I'm fishing for.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I think it really makes finding, making that choice so much easier. You're not going through decision fatigue of like scrolling through what's in here. Oh, should we try this? Should we try that? Like, you can really prioritize what you want to do, where you want to go, and make the most of your time with it. No doubt.
Question about it. The thing interesting, it's the new portion of the electronics puzzle. Do you know what I mean? When you're looking at it, you're mapping 2D down image, all of a sudden you have this map or this app that you can gather tremendous amount of information. You as an angler, information is monstrous, you know what I mean? And not only that, they actually have specific spots on the lake. I mean, better spots for this species. This is what the composition, key spots on that particular lake, which is, it's like sort of stunning. It really is.
And just circling back to your point, as well as that, any lure in your tackle box could, in fact, be a magic bait. It's just that you have to know when, where, how to use it, and in the right situation. Ta-da!
It's a magic bait. There's no question about it. I have tons and tons of them. It goes back to the exact same thing. For you to catch more fish this season, it's very, very simple. Depth, size, and speed of the bait. That is the linchpin. You go out and experiment, and so you're fishing a spot and you catch a number of walleyes. You're catching bass, catching smallmouth bass. Before you leave that spot, pick up some other lures in your tackle box, whether you're catching them on the bottom, whether you're catching them on swim baits or whatever, and experiment with some other lures, and you'll soon find out that that school of fish you were fishing for, not all of them wanted to bite on the bait you're throwing. You'll catch them on a rattle bait, something, you know what I mean? Experiment with the bait, where it's moving in the water column, and you'll soon become a better angler because you'll become more efficient with the baits in your tackle box. That's the linchpin.
And you made a great point there that you can't emphasize enough. It's usually when the fishing gets tough, that's when you try everything in your tackle box. When the fishing is good is really when you should try all the things in your tackle box to gain confidence.
Yeah, you're right about that. The weird thing is, it's very easy to fish through a lot of fish and not catch them. And once you figure out the right depth, size, and speed, and it's just stunning. It's like you hit the light switch, and people just laugh and say, no. It is like, I'm telling you, it is so easy to, in today's day and age, you can see that. That's one thing with the side imaging and these forward-facing sonar is you can tell you're fishing fish. Not only that, I'm not catching them. My son is out right now. He's over in Green Bay. And he said, Dad, I can't catch him. I said, well, you're doing something wrong. You know what I mean? He said, I can see lots of them, I can't catch them. You know what I mean? So depth, size, and speed. Your baits are moving too fast or something, so something's going on.
Yeah, and timing too, obviously, is a big part of it. But yeah, you're absolutely right about those things. So, well, thanks a million for jumping on here, Jim. We got you the little fresco up there from one of your brown bass. I know you like catching everything that swims, but you got a soft spot for brownies.
Brownies, well, it's hard. Yeah, they're like good Labradors. They keep on coming back for more. I think that was a Vermilion special there. You can see how dark red that one is. Yeah, it's a real pretty fish. Yeah,
that's a super cool fish. They do have a great attitude. And if you haven't seen these frescoes, it's super cool. They're these replaceable magnetic photo tiles. So you get the backboard, it's cheap. You can replace the pictures, put whatever you want up there. They're super cool. So yeah, thanks again, Jim. And if you are watching this on television, you can check out the Angling Edge Buzz online. You'll see a longer version of this show. We also have a podcast for you to listen to on your next fishing trip. We appreciate you watching, and we will see you next time.